Hello again guys, welcome back. This is Comic Kid here again, and today we have another Run v Run segment for you guys. Now as y'all can probably tell, today we'll be talking about Jeff Lemire versus Ben Percy on Green Arrow. Now for a bit of background on each series, Lemire was brought in following Ann Nocenti during the New 52 era, and actually did a lot of good for the character. Based on what the New 52 changes brought for Oliver Queen, not a lot of people really liked it. And that's not to say that the Ann Nocenti stuff was bad, but the title definitely needed something extra, and that's really what Lemire brought to the title. But he did write it for only like 3 or 4 arcs, so nothing too crazy in terms of length, but he did bring some much needed, like, fresh air to the series. And then with Ben Percy, I have the Rebirth stuff featured here, and we will be sticking mostly to the Rebirth stuff, but he actually followed Lemire after Lemire himself departed the title. Ben Percy did start his Green Arrow run in the New 52, and was the person who concluded the New 52 Green Arrow, but he's also the one who launched the Rebirth series for the character, and that is the specific one we will be focusing on. So to kind of get started with the more specific stuff, things that Jeff Lemire did. Obviously the biggest contribution that Lemire made to Oliver Queen is by introducing a Miko Queen. Lemire essentially pulled from a lot of classic elements of Green Arrow's history, and while some parts of what he did were a bit tropey, we'll get to that in a minute, he did use those tropes to also do something new with the character. And for those who are unfamiliar, Miko Queen is Oliver Queen's half-sister. Essentially, you learn that Robert Queen is still alive and has a baby with Shadow, who is another recurring Green Arrow character from the past. Since her introduction, Miko has regularly been a part of Oliver Queen's life and was a Teen Titan at the time that the series was cancelled. At the time of me recording this video, both Green Arrow and Teen Titans are no longer running, so Miko is kind of in the background of the DC universe at the moment, but it's a pretty safe bet that she'll be back. The character has been very popular, and so it's pretty safe to say that she's not just gonna fade off into the background for long. Now, as mentioned, Lemire did also bring a breath of fresh air to the series, and he actually took the character in a much more, like, serious, I guess you could say darker direction, and that's really what Oliver Queen and the Green Arrow title needed during this time. Lemire kind of pulled him away from the rest of the DC universe. Oliver was also very involved with the JLA, and that series only ran for so long, and so while you still see him mention and I guess interact with some characters throughout this run, it definitely feels like it's much more Oliver Queen's own title rather than them kind of shoehorning the rest of the universe in there. And so that was certainly a plus. Lemire also worked with several really big Green Arrow villains, and he even did some very welcome new things with them as well, particularly with Komodo. The kind of changes he did to some Green Arrow lore, I guess you could say, were a very welcome addition to the series. The Outsiders War is arguably Lemire's most defining arc with the character, and so if you guys haven't read that, then I highly encourage you to check it out. And then the other big strength about Lemire's run is it definitely felt well-paced. He had a clear beginning, middle, and end. He didn't try and overstay his welcome by any means. You get the sense that he wrapped the story up in a nice little bow, and even though it did continue on and was handed off to Percy, you really get the sense that Lemire did also say everything that he wanted to say and did everything he wanted to do with Oliver Queen. No particular plot points feel open or unresolved or anything like that, so that is another major plus. Now, as far as the bad things he does, like I mentioned earlier, it does feel very tropey at times. Lemire does the whole thing where it's like, oh, so-and-so from the past isn't really dead, and oh, rich superhero loses all his money. And so, while it definitely fit with the story, it would have been nice to put a bit more emphasis on some newer, plot points, I guess. Of course, you could easily argue that that's exactly what Oliver Queen needed at the time, but I feel like Percy managed to do the same sort of trope in a much better manner. However, aside from utilizing quite a few, common tropes, that's really the only negative thing I have to say about Lemire's run. He also worked with artist Andrea Sorrentino throughout the whole thing, with the exception of the special issues. So if you like Sorrentino's art, then you have it throughout the entire Green Arrow run. If you don't, then you are stuck with it, but personally I am a big fan of how Sorrentino tells a story. And I do think it fit very well for a character like Green Arrow as well. But that is actually all that I have in regards to Jeff Lemire. I do highly, highly, highly encourage you guys to check out his run if you have not already done so. Now, to kind of transition to Ben Percy's run, Percy really did a good job of building off of and even utilizing a lot of what Lemire did. Throughout Percy's run, you constantly see Amiko. She's very involved. And it definitely feels like a continuation of what was established during the New 52. Now, the entire objective of DC Rebirth was to reintroduce a lot of classic elements from before the New 52, but I do think Percy did a phenomenal job of blending the two. Not only does he draw a fresh starting line, but those who did enjoy what came before it in the New 52 had no issues transitioning, and classic fans that had fallen off at the New 52 also had a great place to jump in and weren't missing so much. So I do think Percy had a wonderful, wonderful start to his Green Arrow run. Now, we'll start with the bad on Percy, and like I mentioned, he does do the trope where he takes all the money away from the rich superhero, but I actually think he did it in a much more tasteful manner. Throughout all of Percy's run, Green Arrow hardly has any cash. And so Percy takes the character more on a journey of self-discovery, which really kind of helps reestablish him as the version from before the New 52. There's actually a point to taking away all of his money rather than just to make things more difficult. Percy takes his money away and it manages to advance Oliver Queen as a character at the same time. And then the only other negative thing that I think I can say about Ben Percy's run is that he has his weaker arcs. I wouldn't say any arc feels particularly bad, but Lemire managed to keep the incredibly high quality throughout his entire run. Percy does kind of dip up and down as he goes on. I'd say his highs are still very, very high and even on par with Jeff Lemire's, but there are definitely times where it's like that arc was definitely not as good as it likely could have been. That said, I wouldn't say any arc that Percy did is bad, it's just that it wasn't as strong as some of the others. Now, with that in mind, Percy did also write the series for a very long time. The Rebirth run technically runs 39 issues for him, if you count the Rebirth one-shot as well. And so he did write significantly more than Lemire did at the same time. But to get into what's great about Percy's run, and it's that the whole story just kind of builds on itself. All 38 issues tie together wonderfully, and though you can skip some certain arcs, I wouldn't really recommend it. But throughout Percy's run, Oliver Queen is constantly dealing with the Ninth Circle, and despite being the villains from issue 1 to issue 38, everything is paced very well. You don't get tired of seeing the Ninth Circle. All the other villains featured throughout the series are incorporated very well. Percy also manages to rope in plenty of other DC heroes, and so he kind of reestablishes Oliver Queen's standing with a lot of them, especially in regards to like Hal Jordan and the Justice League and so on. Now, Percy did work with several different artists throughout his run as well, but the two most common were Juan Ferreira and Otto Schmidt, and both of them I thought brought their own unique charm to the series. I do think they both fit Oliver Queen very well. Sometimes their particular style wouldn't match other DC characters, but I do feel as though both were great choices for Green Arrow. And so the good news is, if you don't like one art style and do like the other, then you have some constant back and forth. Now, easily Percy's biggest strength throughout this run is the inclusion of Black Canary. A lot of people really like Oliver Queen and Dinah Lance together, and Percy does a great job of kind of reigniting the romance and chemistry that the two share. Everything about them feels natural. They bicker, they fight, but just they feel like they belong together, and that's definitely one of the biggest strengths and I guess whole purposes of Green Arrow Rebirth, is the reestablishment of Oliver Queen and Dinah Lance's relationship. And so seeing the two of them interact constantly throughout the run was very, very refreshing and a very welcome experience. Percy also managed to not just force Dinah into every situation in Oliver's life, and so if for whatever reason you don't like Black Canary, then there are still plenty of moments where Oliver Queen is just by himself, being Oliver Queen. And so yeah, between both of them, I do think they each brought their own unique flair to the Green Arrow character. Percy did a wonderful job of kind of bringing everything full circle and incorporating everything great about the New 52 and the pre-New 52 runs, while Lemire did a lot of the more innovative stuff that the series needed at the time. Now, between the two of them, I honestly don't know which I prefer. I do like how Lemire's run is a bit shorter and more concise, but I also think Percy told the better overall story, and so I highly encourage you guys to check both of them out. Now, like I said, Percy's run is a lot longer and it does have its weaker moments, but the strengths really kind of make up for those weaker elements, and those weaker elements are certainly not enough to break the series. Now, unfortunately, after Percy leaves the series, it really struggled to maintain the same kind of momentum, and DC themselves has said that they have a plan for Green Arrow for a long time, but it's been a really long time since he's been around, and so who knows if they'll do something with him in 2021, or if the plans have changed because of all the massive restructuring that's been going on at DC. So there's that. Everything with Oliver is just kind of up in the air, but hopefully he'll be back soon. But that is everything we have for you guys today. Thank y'all so much for watching. Of course, let me know what y'all think of both runs down in the comments section below. Be sure to hit like and subscribe, and I will see you guys again real soon.